Hello and welcome to StratNews Global. I'm Nitin Gokhale, and we are going to discuss an important subject this evening. We are going live on our YouTube channel, on Twitter, and of course, I'm joined by two very eminent experts on China and the line of actual control, which is witnessing a standoff between Indian and Chinese troops in the remote areas of Ladakh. In fact, in the past fortnight, the newspaper headlines, television headlines, discussions have been dominated by this standoff that is happening between the troops of Indian Army and the People's Liberation Army. So, what is it all about? The why, the where, and how of the India-China boundary dispute, the standoffs, the history of standoffs, is all that we are going to discuss. But let me first introduce two of our the two guests that we have on this program. First, Jayadeva Ranade, career intelligence officer, China watcher for a long time. In fact, all his career, and now runs a think tank of his own, focused entirely on China. So is well up to date on what's happening both inside China and on the boundary with India. And my other panelist is another eminent analyst and now security analyst and expert, Lieutenant General D.S. Hooda, who was Northern Army commander when the last big standoff or face-off happened in Ladakh at a place called Chumur in September 2014, and a subsequent smaller one in DBO, which is in northern Ladakh. Welcome both of you. Thanks for joining me on this discussion. In fact, we will come back to you, but before we start the discussion, I want to take our viewers through a bit of background and history of India-China relationship, as well as the boundary dispute and the history of the standoffs. Now, as you can see on the map, the areas in red are held by China, Aksai Chin in the western sector, which is the disputed area, which is contested. China has occupied it in 62. On the right-hand side in the east, you have the Arunachal Pradesh segment, or the eastern sector with the McMahon line. And of course, in between there is the central sector in Uttarakhand, which is bordering Tibet. So this is a long, nearly 4,000 kilometer undemarcated boundary between India and China, which is a matter of dispute. If you look at the history of India-China relationship, it dates back to 1949, when India recognized the newly formed PRC. And then in October 1950, as many of you will know, the Chinese troops invaded Lhasa. In 1954, India and China signed the Panchsheel document, which sort of proclaimed Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai. But then September 1958 onwards, the territorial dispute started unraveling. And it sort of got accentuated in March 1959 when the Dalai Lama escaped from Lhasa and came into India through Tawang. China refused to accept the McMahon line in Arunachal Pradesh, or then Nefa. And in November 1962, we know India and China fought a bloody war in which India was routed militarily, despite valiant efforts by our brave Jawans. But the next phase was almost like cutting off ties with each other until, of course, there was in between the 1967 Nathula clash, in which China got a bloody nose at Nathula in Sikkim. Till 1986, the differences persisted. The 1988 breakthrough visit by Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi is something that is seen as a landmark. Then in 1993, Prime Minister Narasimha Rao signed the Peace and Tranquility Agreement, which governs many of the agreements on the border right now. And of course, China objected to India's nuclear explosion in 1998. 1999, the border discussions began again. January 2000, the Karmapa fled China, came to India. But 2000 onwards, in this century, the trade ties really took off between India and China. And for a moment, it seemed, or for some years, that India and China have both kept aside their differences on the boundary and they started looking at other segments of their relationship. Nathula Pass was opened for trade and tourism in 2006, but again in 2009, the ties started going down. India cancelled the defense exchange in August 2010. Stapled visas were issued by China in 2010 again. And in Depsang Plains in April 2013, one big standoff took place for 21 days when the Chinese came in quite a distance and pitched tents in that Depsang Plains. Now, since 2013, there have been a series of standoffs which have happened once in Chumur, in fact, which I mentioned a little while earlier, where General Hooda was the Northern Army commander. And this happened when President Xi Jinping was visiting India exactly at the same time. Prime Minister Modi went to China in May 2015. May 2017, India declined to join the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, which some people say led to Doklam or Dolam standoff at the tri-junction of India, Bhutan and China, which contributed or resulted in the mechanism of informal summits between Modi and Xi Jinping. So one took place at Wuhan, the other at Mamlapuram, as we know, last year in 2019. And then, of course, now we are in the current state where the standoffs are happening. First, there was a bit of a sort of dust up in Nakula, not Nathula, mind you, at Nakula in Sikkim. But the action is now shifted to Ladakh, which has been traditionally the area of standoffs and face-offs and fisticuffs at the Pangang So Lake, or Pangang So, which is So is a lake anyway. And a new area has been opened up in the Galwan Valley, which we will talk about. If you look at the whole map which is there, which I had done in one of the programs recently, you will understand what it is. But this is how the entire encapsulation of the boundary dispute can be done. But let me not spend too much time on that because that's history. Let's come to the present and look at why, where, and how this standoff is happening. Why is it happening? Where it is happening? And how it has happened. So let me first come to Mr. Ranade on the reasons he thinks that this standoff is happening at various places in Ladakh, maybe at multiple locations. Is there a different reason, a larger reason, or it's just a localized standoff that happens every spring and summer? Mr. Ranade?
Thank you, Nitin, for, I think, having me here on this program. Not only very topical, but I think it's a very important subject. I don't look at it as something which is localized. Neither do I look at it as something which is the Chinese have done something, we respond, and the matter is over. I think it's a bigger issue, and the Chinese have obviously put a lot of thought into it. This is my view, and it's been a deliberate move by the Chinese. And let me just mention a couple of things to try and put it into context. There are a lot of people who will think that we are attributing far too many motives to Chinese. But it starts off from the question that do you trust the Chinese? Do you accept it when they take a position and say, well, okay, we have agreed on this? Don't forget, when Chow Enlai visited India, I think it was 58 or 59, at that time, Pandit Nehru asked him something about Ladakh. He said, I understand you're claiming Ladakh. And he said, show me one place where we have said that Ladakh is not India's. And after that, we have seen how things have changed after 1962. Similarly, when it came to Sikkim, hardly was the ink dry on the agreement after Vajpayee's, Prime Minister Vajpayee's visit, when a Chinese vice foreign minister said that the issue is not yet settled, which was repeated recently during the little standoff at Nakula. Now, my own view is that the Chinese have been looking at India for a while as a country that is becoming more and more of a challenge. They have always, at some corner of their mind, looked at us as a potential challenge, but now they're seeing it as more of a challenge. Things were brewing even in 2017, but the timing went off kilter and Doklam happened. I think that was an accident as far as the Doklam commander was concerned. But anyway, it did happen. There was a standoff, and we all know what happened, how the two sides disengaged. But the reaction in China was, I think, more acerbic than expected, certainly by Xi Jinping. Now, again, what we are seeing is a changed environment in China, where Xi Jinping has hyped up a lot of nationalism. In China, he's given them massive doses of ideology. He has injected a lot of security measures, which are now becoming very intrusive to the people. And there is a lot of discontent, including very unprecedented in China calls for the Chinese Communist Party relinquishing its monopoly on power and for him to step down. So there is what I'm trying to say is there's a compulsion on him to try and deflect or divert attention, especially now when the National People's Congress is going on. So this is one. The second is that he's unable to fulfill the ambitions that he spent out for the people, first being the China dream. He had said that by 2021, he will recover all the so-called territories that were lost to China through the imposition of unequal treaties. Now, all the places that you have mentioned, Ladakh, Sikkim, Arunachal, they're all part of that. Territories being lost, Chinese territories, which have to be recovered. So, of course, Taiwan, Hong Kong, East Sea, South China Sea, etc. So that is the second. Now, if he can, the Chinese people feel that the leadership has lost its grip and it's all slipping away. They're looking at Hong Kong, the protests against the Chinese, questioning the legitimacy of the Chinese Communist Party. They're looking at what's happening in Taiwan, where a pro-independence Democratic Progressive Party has come back, been re-elected. They're looking at India, which they feel has become growing closer to the United States. So all these factors have come together. And then, of course, there are many other factors where, the economic situation is deteriorating. And the Chinese are looking at India as probably the only big market which is available to them now. The United States, I think, after the strategic approach paper, which they issued on the 20th of May, virtually closes off the American market for them, if not right away within a few months. Europe is in a bad shape thanks to COVID, and they're not going to open up in a hurry. There also there is a backlash against the Chinese. The Chinese themselves have assessed that the global opinion is very anti-China and it's growing. So I think they're looking at a bleak picture outside Beijing. And one of the things that they feel need to do is to try and arrest that pattern and also try and build up a market and put us under pressure for that. That is one of the factors. But I think it is also that Xi Jinping is under pressure and he wants to show that he is restoring the old territories back to China. So I think, to cut it short, let me just say, after having spelled all this out, of course, these are some of the key factors that I'm mentioning. But I think as far as we are concerned, in my view, we are not looking at a short and swift sort of standoff or discussion and then it's over. I think it's going to be either repeated or they are settling in for a longish, protracted bout of negotiations, which will result in de facto them occupying where they are today and maybe keeping the issue open for the future.
Okay, so that's been their tactics for quite some time. But let me come to General Hooda. In fact, let me take you back to 2014 and the current standoff. Since you handled it hands-on in 2014 and of course in 2015, the smaller standoffs that happened perhaps in DBO, that petrol point 14, 15, where you had some issues with them at that point in time. But how do you see the current standoff? How is it different qualitatively and quantitatively?
So Nitin, it's different in many ways. So if you just go back to Tumor of 2014, it was geographically isolated. It was an area where we'd be having some kind of dispute about where exactly the alignment of the LAC lies. They wanted to construct a road, which we stopped them from doing. So we were clear on both sides as to what we wanted, which was to stop the construction of their road. They wanted to construct a road and be able to patrol those disputed areas in a much better fashion. Otherwise, they had to do it on foot. So in some ways, the red lines were clear. In the current case, I'm not sure what the red lines are. Because yes, Pengong, so there have been differences in the past about the alignment of the LAC, but areas like Galwan, even Nakula, these are well settled areas. I know there is no exact alignment which has been marked on maps or on ground, but generally we've never had a problem in Galwan, we've never had a problem in Nakula. People are also talking about areas like PP 14 and 15. Again, in these areas, there has never been an issue. So why have they opened up so many fronts? Why have they brought in troops in such large numbers? Obviously, it's not a local issue. And obviously, it's not planned at the local level, because the way troops have come in, the preparation with which they have come in. If there is one similarity between Chumar and now Nitin, it is that they choose their time carefully. Everybody looks at Chumar as a time when it was the visit of President Xi Jinping, which is right. What people don't connect very often, Nitin, is it was the time when we had Kashmir floods. All our tracks and roads from Kashmir, where most of the reinforcements would come, were completely cut off, and that was the time they chose to try and make this intrusion into Chumar. And similarly, I think, as Mr. Ranade has pointed out, maybe they feel India is under a bit of pressure with what is happening. Their own internal politics is going on as it is, the sort of international condemnation that they've had. People looking at moving supply chains out of China. Maybe they find this as an opportune time to put some pressure and in some ways to coerce India. What exactly do they want? I think we'll get to know later.
I think that's what you mentioned. Now, you also mentioned somewhere in the piece that you wrote recently in the last few days, is that they seem to have come prepared, General Hooda, with batons studded with metal studs, and sort of trying to injure people. And the quantity of troops is far higher than you've ever seen, is something that you've mentioned. Others have also talked about it. But
yes, Nitin.
Yes.
Yeah, Nitin, so what you're saying is absolutely right. One thing that has always characterized all standoffs in the past, you look at Depsang, you look at Chumar, you look at Doklam, was that really there was very little kind of violence or physical sort of scuffles, and a very high degree of restraint on both sides. This time it just seems to have gone out of the window. If what reports are to be believed, that you're coming in large numbers, you're coming with sticks, batons, somebody said studded with nails, the kind of injuries that have occurred on both sides. I think if this restraint goes out of the window, Nitin, you have just in Ladakh alone almost 500 transgressions every year, which is almost one a day. So if you're not going to exercise restraint, then I'm afraid this whole LAC management and border management and protocols will completely break down.
Yeah, exactly. So this begs the question then, Mr. Ranade, that have we run out of the usefulness of the existing mechanisms? We have a series of them starting from 1993, coming right up to the Wuhan and the Mamlapuram summits. But even in 2013, we signed the Border Cooperation Defense Agreement, the BDCA, the Border Defense Cooperation Agreement there in Beijing. Are they now completely useless in your view? Does India and China need a new mechanism to deal with the boundary issue?
I wouldn't call them useless, but I think right at the start I had mentioned that an agreement is valid only as long as both parties respect it. And here, when we have these agreements and then we look at what is happening, I'm going by, of course, what I'm aware of. The standoffs that happen or the intrusions that happen, they are being perpetrated by one side. They're being perpetrated by the PLA or by the border troops. And so all this argument that it's a difference in perception. frankly, I don't buy it because, as General Hooda also just said, troops have been patrolling there for a long time. It's not that every time there is some issue or every year there is an issue, but the numbers have been going up. If you look at the figures, the numbers have been going up. And obviously, that indicates that either there is more of a feeling of confidence or overconfidence on the Chinese side. There is also a feeling that perhaps it's time to recover certain things. So I don't think that the agreements are, have outlived their utility. But I do feel that both sides have to abide by them. And the point I'm trying to make is, if the Chinese have decided that at some level that they can sort of test the limits of those agreements or even push the envelope, then that means that they have some other agenda. And let me just mention one more thing which I come across. And this is in the Chinese media, Chinese language media. They don't put it in the English language media. But I find an increased number of references post-Doklam to India in various things. I mean, like, for example, if they're talking about a new aircraft being built up, or if they're talking about deployment of aircraft in Tibet region, or if they're talking about aircraft or tanks being supplied to the Pakistanis, there's always a line added there saying that this will help the Pakistanis against the Indians, or this will strengthen them against the Indians. I mean, these are lines that were not there earlier. So the inference that I get is somewhere the Doklam thing is still bothering them, and bothering the PLA particularly, and they have it in their mind. Don't forget, there was a lot of adverse public reaction to the disengagement by China at Doklam. So that still lingers. So I'm just mentioning that as one factor. The second is the very close ties between the Chinese and the Pakistanis. So I'm not saying that the Pakistanis are doing the planning for them, but certainly they're doing some instigation, or must be giving them some ideas or whatever. And as I wrote in my piece in Sunday Guardian week before last, there is a Pakistani colonel now, an ISI colonel, who is posted in the Central Military Commission in a Joint Staff Department. So that indicates a certain kind of, I think General Hooda would be able to explain it better, cooperation or collaboration between the two at a military level, which is somewhat different from at the political level or even at the intelligence level. So I think that, as I said, I go back to this combination of factors, and I feel also that there is a very important factor which we have not touched upon. In fact, I should have, which is, after we issued the new maps, the Chinese perceive it as now, don't forget, they always look at the Modi government as a more muscular government, as something which is more conscious of its sovereignty, national sovereignty and territorial integrity. And they now, after this map, do consider that their strategic and financial interests in that region are under have become more vulnerable or are under threat.
Okay.
Especially the sea, and now they're talking about the Daimler Dam, etc. So they have got these interests there, financial and strategic. And let me just conclude by saying that one of the tasks of the Western Theatre Command is to protect Chinese nationals and the assets of the CPEC. So I'm just laying it out there. I don't think the agreements are, can be trashed, but I think a lot depends on how the Chinese look at it. And they seem to be testing the limits of that.
That's right. The agreements are certainly coming under pressure. But you mentioned how the India line comes in the reports. This morning on Global Times, in fact, they did put out testing of an unmanned helicopter meant for the Tibetan Plateau, which will be used against India, is what they have put out in the English press this morning. So you're absolutely right about that trend. But General Hooda, coming to you, there is a school of thought amongst China watchers and those who watch the border areas, is that India has got its act together, or has sort of stepped up its efforts to improve the infrastructure. And you've been witness to a lot of that operational works that used to happen or are still happening in that area. and because of that, Indian troops are now able to go to areas where they didn't go earlier, and therefore there's bound to be friction between patrols coming with each other. And of course, the Chinese now saying that we need to stop India or slow down their infrastructure building. Could that be one of the reasons also for this intensity of the standoff or intensity of pressure that the Chinese are applying in Ladakh?
Yes, Nitin. Before I come to your question, this whole issue of border agreements and protocols that we have. My sense on ground, Nitin, is a lot of them are not working, and that's why you are seeing this whole banner drill business of go back. These days, it's respected less and less. In fact, it's more often than not respected at all. And therefore, I think there is a need to, I'm not saying crash everything, but I think there is a need to go back and just relook all these protocols, because they frankly on ground, I can tell you, are not working as well as they were when it started. Coming to this issue of infrastructure, there are two points, Nitin. Yes, infrastructure has speeded up. One reason why we are able to observe more transgressions is also because our ability to move into areas along the line of actual control has improved tremendously.
Right.
Otherwise, Chinese would come and go back. You won't even come to know, because your ability to move to those areas was not there. And that's also one reason why we are seeing more and more transgressions. Our ability to observe, patrol, and manage the LAC has become much better. I think it worries the Chinese, because they've had so much superiority over our infrastructure, roads up to the line of actual control, which would have given them tremendous advantage in case conflict ever breaks out. So we have seen in the past, in a number of border personnel meetings that we've had, they're objecting, I think, unnecessarily to infrastructure coming up, in some cases, even civilian infrastructure. For example, we have Demchok village, which is very close to the LAC. And they would object to things like laying of water pipelines, building infrastructure for civilians in that area. So they are fairly sensitive to infrastructure. We have tried to tell them every time that as long as we are not transgressing the LAC, they should have no problem. But it's something that they object to because they want to keep us on the back foot. Largely, we have managed our way by saying, yes, we need to create infrastructure. I think this whole Galwan River issue is also, about what we can see from the media about making a bridge and making a road going towards the LAC. But the fact, Nitin, is that the LAC in this area has never been disputed. We've never had a problem. And therefore, for them to come up with issues like this is frankly not justified. So yes, it is an area of concern for them. The fact that India is now building up infrastructure and the ability to be able to respond to whatever they might be thinking that they could do in Ladakh, that advantage is fast sort of receding. So they take that as an excuse for saying, "Don't, you have created infrastructure in our areas, or you are blocking up patrols from coming in, etc., etc." But frankly, it's really not a logical sort of debate from their side. But it's something they push. I mean, that's the reality.
I think they have been irrational in those cases. But before I come to the questions that we can discuss, I want to take a couple of questions from the audience who have joined us live. And there is a question from Koteshwara Rao, who is asking whether opening a new front in South China Sea will help ease the pressure. Mr. Ranade, what do you think?
I don't think so. I think this is something, which we need to sort out here. Let's not, going to South China Sea is, I would say, complicating the issue and really opening a new front. But there are other things that we can do. I think General Hooda would be better placed to answer them. But if I can answer them, he's obviously thought of them. So by which we can balance out the situation here. So I think that's what we need to do.
Yeah, so General Hooda, what do you think we should be able to do? I mean, there's one, sorry, before I ask you to, I allow you to answer that question. the one of the thoughts that are coming to a lot of people's mind, those who have watched the Indian Army or have worked in the Indian Army, is that 30 years ago we had the Sundaram Chu standoff in Arunachal Pradesh, which went on for more than nearly 18 or 20 months or maybe 2 years. And the Indian Army had the ability then, and maybe Indian Army has a better ability now to withstand this kind of a prolonged standoff, if that kind of a prolonged standoff. Do you think that is really realistic to expect, or should it happen that they sit there? Then the Indian Army needs to sit there. Obviously, there is no other choice. But our ability is obviously, our capabilities are obviously far better than what they were 30 years ago, isn't it?
Absolutely, Nitin. We would all like that the matter gets diffused. So as long as the areas now don't expand further, and the Chinese start coming in some other areas, as long as both sides can sort of maintain some kind of restraint, sitting opposite where they are sitting is just not an issue in terms of capability or logistics or anything. I think more than that, if it continues, there is also the ability from our side, to be able to put pressure in other areas. I'm not saying we should come to that, but let me just say that there is the ability. It's not as if completely the Indian Army is going to be on the defensive and on the back foot and is only going to respond to what the Chinese are going to do. You saw what had happened at Doklam. So when they were building, it was the Indian Army which took the initiative and went. So I don't think we need to go and look as far away as South China Sea. There are areas along the border, I think, where if required, there is the ability to put pressure on China.
Yeah, I think that is absolutely correct, because you have practically sort of seen what can be done and where the pressure points are, what are the vulnerabilities that the Chinese have. That can always be activated. But there's another question here which says that what does India think, or what should India make of Secretary Alice Wales' statement, which seemed to sort of support India's stand vis-a-vis the standoff with China. This is coming from Abhishek Sharma. He says, what do you think of Secretary Wales' statement reiterating legitimacy of the LAC? Mr. Ranade, is it also that...
it's a...
Yes, go ahead. Please go ahead. Mr. Ranade, please go ahead.
It's a show of support. It's a statement of support. It's a show of support. But it flows also from the new strategic approach, United States strategic approach to China, which is a new paper that they brought out on the 10th of May, where also they have, shall I say, made a comment on China being proactive and, trying to compare. And they have expressed concern of what's happening at the Sino-Indian borders also. So I would say that is there. There has been a reaction from the Chinese, and let me just share with you that there was a reaction from Beijing, from the Chinese Foreign Ministry in Beijing, but a sharper reaction was the one given by the spokesman of the Chinese embassy in Delhi, who, when he made that statement about being determined to ensure their sovereignty, etc., he added one line which where he said they're also determined to complete the reunification of China. Now, whether he meant to say that or not, I don't know, but it certainly proves our point as to what their intentions are, or malevolent intentions are.
Yes. So taking off from there, do you think the Chinese are also, and you mentioned Xi Jinping's problems both internally and otherwise, and so is it something that he and his close advisors are trying to do, is to show to the world that despite the coronavirus setback, or the entire world going against them because of their, I would say, lapses in handling or not informing the world, the Chinese are trying to assert themselves across Asia, from Japan, East China Sea to Bhutan, or to up to Doklam and say that, look, we are still powerful. We have not lost any zing or any military ability or economic ability. Could that be one of the reasons also for Xi Jinping to order all these pressure points in East China Sea, South China Sea, Indonesia, and now finally India and Bhutan? Mr. Ranade?
Certainly, certainly, Nitin. As I said, when there is a perception gaining ground in China, or which has gained ground in China, that the leadership has lost its grip as far as attaining the two centenary goals are concerned. What they're saying, the China dream by 2021 and rivaling the United States by 2049. So what we are seeing Xi Jinping do from February this year, till then he was sort of almost dormant. It was being left to the others. But from February this year, we see him, calling back his loyalists, including one or two who retired or are close to retirement. But they're his men. He's called them back. They're tough guys. And he's now cracking down on Hong Kong, for example. And in a manner in which it's almost like a message to the Hong Kong people: we don't care what you think, but we are going to impose our authority. We're going to impose our laws. So we are getting that security law into Hong Kong. He has started applying pressure on Taiwan in different ways. They're planning a major exercise in the Taiwan Straits. Apparently, it's an amphibious exercise. They're sending ships more frequently into the South China Sea, and they've started deploying, missiles, or carrying out some landings on some of those reefs and all that there. And they have started, pressurizing us. So it is a way of trying to show that he's strong. But the second point is, they also feel that the rest of the world is far too preoccupied with taking care of COVID, grappling with COVID. So it's like something that I think gentlemen don't do, hit a man when he's down, but I think that's what they're doing. As far as we are concerned, they think that we are very, very preoccupied with COVID. We won't be able to do anything else. They also have, in their media, by the way, let me say, tried to exaggerate the effect of COVID on the Indian armed forces. They're also playing up the havoc that COVID is causing in the United States, and saying that that they're on the back foot. So they feel that today they're in an advantageous position, and they can flaunt their strength, and this is a window of opportunity for them. But I dare say that they might find that they're being too overconfident on this.
Overstretched, perhaps, if you look at the expanse. So it's not something new. Their playbook has been like this. The 1962 war was launched at a time when the United States and Soviet Union were preoccupied with the Cuban Missile Crisis. If we go back and look at history at that point in time, and 62, of course, was a swift 1 month long war, as we saw. But General Hooda, before I take discussion further, there's a question from Dev, who says, is there chances of interoperability between Pakistan Air Force and the PLA Air Force north of Ladakh, which they do via Shaheen exercise? As a military leader, what is your take on that?
So there is interoperability. I mean, the two air forces have been training together. The two armies have been training together. Whether they will get together and try and do something in the dark, I think as of now, it's out of the current realm of possibility that Pakistan military and the Chinese military or even their air forces will sort of come and try and operate opposite Ladakh in Tibet. I don't think so. And even if there are a few, let's say, training sort of exercises, I don't think it should be such a matter of concern to us. Our ability to operate in and across Tibet airspace is fairly strong. There are limits to how much the PLA Air Force can take off from their high altitude airfields, the limitations that they have, the number of aircraft that they can deploy. So as far as the air situation is concerned, I still think the Indian Air Force has a certain amount of edge over the PLA Air Force. So just in this very normal, narrow specific context of air forces, I don't think there is much for us to be worried about.
Right. Mr. Ranade, there's a question from our common friend, Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, who's joined here, and he's saying, what about the timing? He says, is it counterintuitive to open up all fronts when you're under global pressure? China is picking up fights in, as we mentioned, and I think you partly answered it. So why take on India at this juncture is what he's asking. Mr. Ranade, to you.
As I said, it could be a dose of overconfidence, which they're doing. And, they have they had developed the sense that India will not retaliate. So, and it will look for some easy option, some easy way out, So at Doklam also, in fact, the Chinese expectation was that the Bhutanese would issue a diplomatic note of protest. India, at the most, and this was the wording given to me by someone, they said, at the most, would also issue a diplomatic note of protest, and that is it. They never expected that our troops would go there and block them, and so quickly. So that was, I think, first lesson which they got. And I think there have been subsequent instances also. I mean, even earlier, what happened at Chumar, what happened at the Depsang plain, but they should realize that it's not, the same old kind of pattern that is going to be followed out. I certainly see our people yielding ground and going back. And I personally, I don't think this government is going to yield ground. I hope not.
Yeah, okay. So I'm just running out of time. I've just got 2 or 3 minutes. So last two questions to both of you. General Hooda, to you first. What are India's options in such a situation is what the general trend of questions is. Can we just sit and be there staring at each other for a prolonged period is what someone is asking. And are there pressure? You already partly answered it. But is there any other pressure point that India can apply so that the negotiations begin or diplomatic exchanges begin? Because ultimately it has to be a diplomatic solution to a military standoff is what everybody thinks. So just your thoughts, final thoughts on this.
So Nitin, going by past sort of experience, as these standoffs drag on, actually things become calmer. I know maybe there is some media hype, but the initial tense part actually is the first few days that things should not go out of control. And you've seen that at Doklam and at Chumar. Things start calming down, and then negotiations start taking place. India is going to stand firm. India is going to stand its ground where it is. Now, as I said, it's not necessarily defensive. Let us see what the demands that are being made by the Chinese. If there is a requirement for us to put pressure somewhere, and obviously these are plans that cannot be discussed in the open, but there are areas, there are places, there are ways that it can be done. So I think also the Chinese should be conscious, as Mr. Ranade has also pointed out. I mean, if you look in the past, where has military pressure on India after 1962 worked? 67, in Nathula, you've talked about Wangdong, you had a large number of standoffs, and we know the ones 2013, 14, and 17. I mean, where has military pressure worked on India that has given very big dividends to the Chinese? So I think they should just sort of introspect and see. I don't think they're going to come out smelling roses in this or becoming big winners. I think we have the ability, the capability to be able to hold on where we are, and if required, to respond at some places.
I think very well put, and I think that's really very heartening to know the ability that India has built up over the years, the capability. Mr. Ranade, final question to you. Some experts or some observers have sort of suggested that there are three T's or three T vulnerabilities: trade, Tibet, and Taiwan that China has, and then India should start using those vulnerabilities or exploit them far more than it has done so far. Your final thoughts on that?
Well, I would not call Taiwan a vulnerability. I would say that Taiwan is an economic opportunity that we should exploit. And the fact that we haven't done it for so long is actually our failing. So that is one economic opportunity we should certainly go for. The Chinese themselves trade with Taiwan, so that's
Right.
why I did not call it
Vulnerable.
but the second part about Tibet, certainly it's there. It's an option that we always have, the fact that Tibet exists. And the pressure on the Chinese mounting from the United States also on the issue of the Dalai Lama. So it's not just us. And as far as we are concerned, our policy has always been, and I think very correctly, through history actually, before we became this political entity of India as it is today, even before, thousands of years earlier, that we always offered sanctuary to people who came. So that will continue, and I don't see the Tibetans being sent back or going anywhere. And our policy, we leave people to do their own religious things. So we are not going to interfere with that. And I think the Chinese would know that. So they're doing their own. But it is a vulnerability as far as they're concerned. We can always exploit that. We can always tap that in. They also have Xinjiang, which is a vulnerability. Whether we choose to do anything there or not is a different issue. And as you said, I would say there are other vulnerabilities also which they have. And trade.
The market that we have. The market
Trade,
that we have.
the market that we have is something that we need to really think long and hard about, because in my personal opinion, we have allowed them unfettered, free and uncontrolled access without any reciprocity from their side. So
Right.
what they have done is they have virtually hollowed out our economy. Some of our biggest industrialists are in debt to them. They have borrowed money from them, which is not a good thing from our point of view. Some of our
True.
sensitive industries today are, virtually closing shop because the same goods people are being able to get from China cheaper and quicker. So we've got to step in and control that. And I think that is a big lever that we have. And the way the Chinese have been behaving, threatening people, saying that we are going to cut off your supplies. They did that in the Philippines. They did that with Japan. And they threatened the United States on the 4th of March. A Sinwa article saying we will send you to the hell of COVID because 90% of your medicines are either manufactured here or they are sourced from here. So things like this are not endearing them anywhere. And I think in any case, in the post-COVID world, they're going to have a tough time because exports people are not going to depend on the Chinese for sourcing their material. And I think we need to start thinking also of the same thing.
Great. So, on that note, I must thank both of you for such candid and insightful comments and taking those questions patiently. I thank all those who have joined us here live. We are experimenting with this kind of a format, but I'm glad so many people have joined us. We thank each one of them. And do subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, our Facebook page, our Instagram page, and keep sending feedback and writing to us. We will come back with more such programs and more such discussions. But until the next time, it's goodbye and good night.